Okay.
We're going to start with some introductions here. I'm going to let Rachel go first and introduce herself.
You bet. I'm Rachel Mullins, and I am the president and CEO of the Putnam Museum and Science Center. And I'm not sure if Chris is on with us or not.
I'm here. Do you want me to go?
Perhaps.
Okay, you don't have a picture of me yet, but I'm Christina Castell. I'm the curator of history and anthropology at the Putnam Museum.
I'm Lisa Powell-Williams. I'm the Adult and Young Adult Services Coordinator for the Moline Public Library, and I'm also privileged to sit on the Community Advisory Board for WQPT.
We want to thank all of our panelists tonight for joining us, and we really appreciate everybody else for coming and attending our screening tonight. We're just going to start right off with a question for Rachel. So why did the museum choose to do an exhibit about local suffrage?
Well, it actually came out of a previous exhibit. In 2018, the Putnam hosted an exhibit that was for the literary heroines, and it featured women of literature. And so it was a great opportunity to feature the Putnam collection around these vignettes of women. There was local storytelling where Chris actually went out and collected oral histories of some of our local women, including Maggie Tensman, who was in the state Senate for almost 20 years. And she's the one that actually first suggested that we look at the upcoming anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. And it was kind of a challenge to the Putnam to celebrate these real world women from our history with a focus on the local suffrage movement. And it was a great opportunity for the Putnam. We're a museum of history, science, and culture, but also an institution that really serves as kind of keepers of local history. We're sort of local history enthusiasts. So it seemed like a great opportunity for us to celebrate and also illuminate kind of this amazing milestone in local history. So it really kind of represented this fascinating connection of history, but also shifts in politics and culture and social norms, and shifts in technology, which is one of the exhibit explores. But it also is kind of a snapshot of the women's right movement in the modern era. So it looks back on the ERA movement, but also sort of a snapshot of where we are currently in women's equality in the workforce and in the local economy, with some fascinating statistics on, kind of that hard won but still not done kind of message around women's equality. So great opportunity for the Putnam.
Thanks for explaining all that. Christina, I'm glad we got your video up and it looks like we can see and hear you now. Was the Liberated Voices Change Lives exhibit created using items from the Putnam's collection, or were they on loan from another museum? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'd love to. The artifacts that you see in the exhibit are from our collection. Now, when we first started planning this exhibit, we realized that we really don't have very many suffrage exhibits in artifacts in our collection. So I didn't know what I was going to do. How do you do a suffrage exhibit without suffrage artifacts? So I got to thinking about how things happened that women were able to get suffrage, what was going on in their lives, what kind of changes were going on. So we looked at suffrage from the changes in women's lives, the changes in technology through the household that allowed them to have access to extra time, because things like the washing machine, which gave them the extra time to use the electric washing machine and save time from having to scrub clothes on the scrub board. And there were other changes going on in their lives, changes in clothing, changes in culture. And you'll see all of those types of artifacts at the Putnam Museum.
It's really cool. Rachel, I know you mentioned Maggie Tensman. Who were some of the other people and organizations that the Putnam collaborated with on this exhibit?
Yeah, it was really created by a committee of women that represented our local libraries, the arts community, local historians, including Lisa and her involvement. And then, of course, local organizations. So the entire season was sponsored by Scott County Regional Authority. So they picked up support of this exhibit as well. Iowa Humanities supported the exhibit, which is a great endorsement on the level of research that was done on the display content. We brought in a humanities scholar, Jane Simonson, who is a professor with Augustana College, to work with us to assure the highest standards are being met for research and interpretation, historical interpretation. Royal Neighbors came to the table, which was a lot of fun because they actually are celebrating their 125th anniversary. And if you don't know a lot about Royal Neighbors, they were created, founded by 9 women who believe so strongly in the rights of women and their children that they wanted to ensure their safety. But they also picked up the suffrage movement very early, and through their chapter system nationwide, they were a major influence on the passage of suffrage. So they actually participated in the exhibit with support, but also some casements of some of the artifacts from the early days of Royal Neighbors and some of the stories of their work to fight for recognition of the right to vote. We're also partnering with River Music Experience. We went to the table as part of their live music month that's coming up in August. And so we're hosting a virtual event. We were hoping to do a big live gathering of women, and I think all of us would be appalled at that thought now. So we're moving that to a virtual event to celebrate women in the arts in many different fields. So that'll be August 26th. Mike Mickle Productions came to the table to work with us on some video production to create some of those wonderful oral histories. So there are actually 10 vignettes, local stories of men and women that were both for and against suffrage at the time, just to kind of tell that local story and local context around the suffrage movement. So we have staff and local actors and some of our local historians. I think, Lisa, you were one.
I was
playing these little sort of historical in full costume and portraying these historical figures. A lot of fun. It was one of those portrayals actually of Mabel Palmer that then brought the Palmer Archive and Vicki Ann Palmer-Pruder to the table as a partner as well. So Mabel Palmer is featured in the exhibit as our some wonderful iconic imagery of Palmer campus and a big Votes for Women banner hanging from the old smokestacks on Palmer campus. So just extraordinary images that I doubt our community has seen before.
That's a lot of partners and a lot of great partners. We work with a lot of those same partners.
Yes, I know Chris probably has a list of some of the notorious characters of the time that were presented in these vignettes.
I do. Do you want to hear about them?
Well, let's hear about El Dorado Jones.
El Dorado Jones, you got to hear about that one. Yeah,
El Dorado Jones was quite the character. She established a factory in Moline to produce something called that Happy Iron, which was a lightweight electric iron as compared to the sad iron, the heavy old cast iron that women had been using. And she hired only women workers who were over 40 years old because she knew that if a woman needed a job at that age, that she was going to be a very good worker. And El Dorado also designed an airplane muffler of all things, but she was rather strongly against men. I don't know exactly what had happened to her in her life, excepting I know that the father absconded with all the family's money and left them with another woman. And so she had a bad taste in her mouth about men, and she was not afraid to tell them so. And I think she told off one too many people in New York City, and she couldn't get the funding to go into production with her airplane muffler.
So there are 10 of these spread throughout the exhibit of just stories of men and women. And the local German heritage is another interesting one because of the link between suffrage and the abolitionist movement. So just really rich storytelling in the exhibit.
That's awesome. Before I move on to a question for Lisa and bring her into this discussion, I want to just tell everybody else, you can still write your questions in for our panelists. Just type them into the chat box, the comment box right below, and we'll get to those in just a little bit. But in the meantime, Lisa, can you tell us about the role temperance played in women's suffrage movement in the Quad Cities?
I can tell you a little bit about that. And I think it's great that Rachel just alluded to the German American Heritage Center, which is, again, partnerships make us all more effective. We learn so much from each other. And one of the things I really value about sitting on Putnam communities is how inclusive they try to be and make sure that everybody in the community is represented. So to that end, we even have a male story in all of those stories. Henry Kohler, who was a German brewmeister and bar owner, and he was not real thrilled with some of the folks in the movement because, as you can imagine, temperance is going to shut him down in Iowa when that prohibition movement sweeps through in the late 1880s. But even closer to home, our own Annie Wittenmeyer, well, Keokuk's own Annie Wittenmeyer, for whom we know the Iowa Orphans Soldiers Home, became the first person for the Women's Christian Temperance Union. But Annie wasn't such a big suffrage person. So another well-known name in Illinois and in the local community, some of our schools have her name, is Frances Willard, because Frances could see where suffrage was going to help the cause of temperance. If you talked about the role of women in protecting their home unit, suddenly you had a different argument for more women to buy into why they should vote. Because often temperance was advocated for in the church, often in the Protestant mainline churches were dry, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, some of the Baptists. And a lot because they were a time when men could go take all the wage earnings and go drink them away. So they thought if they would lose the alcohol, that everybody would be better. It would be better for the women. It would be better for the children. And so those causes joined together.
That's interesting. Very interesting. Christina, I've got a question for you. I know you mentioned a little bit about machines and the impact it played in suffrage. Can you talk a little bit more about how machines impacted home life and how that in turn impacted women and their ability to participate in suffrage?
Sure. About towards the end of the 1800s, inventors were mostly men at that time, but they figured out that there was money to be made by creating inventions for the household, that there were a lot of women out there who were doing arduous tasks. Our own inventor, Mr. Voss, who invented a washing machine here in the Quad Cities, had seen his mother labor over doing the family laundry. It took a full day and a half to do the laundry and the ironing. Well, the ironing was another day. So 2.5 days of the week, it took his mother to complete the family laundry. And he realized that that shouldn't have to be. So he invented a better washing machine. And then the electric washing machine was invented, and Mr. Voss was right behind that electric washing machine the next year, inventing a Voss electric washing machine. So that saved women hours of hard labor. And there were things like the electric vacuum cleaner that was invented in 1905. Before that, women would beat the rugs with rug beaters. They'd take them up off the floor. They were tacked down. So, hundreds of tacks had to be taken off. And then those rugs rolled up and taken outside and hung over the lines and beaten with the rug beaters. You have electric hand mixers, electric toasters, electric waffle irons, all these wonderful things that helped women out with their homes. With communication, you have the telephone. So women, instead of having to write notes to organize meetings, could get on the phone and talk to everybody and say, okay, we're going to have a meeting this week to talk about suffrage. So they saved a lot of time that way. Lighting in the household was a great thing for women, because in the days of using candles and kerosene lamps, you couldn't see well enough at night to do intricate chores like cleaning. You had to do them in the daylight. So the electrical lights allowed women to shuffle some of their work to the nighttime, and then they could meet in the daytime. So there was a lot that freed women up to have the time. And I'm talking about the middle class women. Now, the wealthy women had servants that did all that work for them, but those of us who were middle class couldn't afford servants. So it was a huge benefit of them to have that extra time.
I never even thought about all of those different inventions. Those are just things that we grew up with, and laundry doesn't take 2.5 days now. So it's crazy to think about that. This next question I'm going to pose to Lisa, but you guys can all jump in if you want to. Could you compare and contrast how women's rights to vote evolved in Illinois and in Iowa? The differences in...
Chris and I are going to tag team this because being an Illinoisan most of my life, and that's what I did my research pieces on, including one of our Moline natives, Abby Walker Gould. We'll talk a bit about that. Some of the things I think about in Illinois that are very unique, in skipping kind of to the end of the story, is that Illinois in 1913 became the first state east, instead of usually so we say west of, east of the Mississippi to allow women to vote in presidential elections. So I think that's a pretty wonderful thing for Illinois. But if we back up, particularly looking at local history, First Congregational Church in Moline played host to some of the names that we still hear in our history books today. In the late 1870s, I think it was 1877, Elizabeth Cady Stanton addressed that entire church filled with people. Just 2 years later, Frances Willard had to have 2 standing room only crowds to listen to her message. And I think that's pretty important because over the years, Moline's gotten this reputation for being a little bit conservative and a little more slowly paced. And I'm thinking, wow, we were right on it back in the day. Mm-hmm. Also in Illinois, and I'm going back to Abby Walker Gould, in her bio, she talks about the importance of her sister-in-law being elected to a school board. And here's something that's a little backwards for Illinois. In the late 1870s, I think it's 1873, women were allowed to be elected to school boards, but women didn't get to vote for people on the school board till 1891. So I think it's pretty amazing that any women got on there in those 20.
It's a little backwards.
It's 20 years. And as we did some more research in the dispatch archives that we had digitized by the Friends of our Library, it was really interesting too to find out that even when women had the right to vote in these different elections, they had to have a separate ballot and a separate ballot box. And in the papers, all of that was tallied. You saw the men's vote and the women's vote. And even as late as 1919, for the city election, I kept looking, what's different on these ballots? They don't line up, but I can't figure out. Nope, we didn't get to vote for the police magistrate then. So, you know, we could do all these other offices, but not that one. I think another thing that differentiates Illinois to some degree is Chicago and the role of some of our African-American sisters in Chicago. And I think a lot about Ida B. Wells, and particularly the March in Washington that's going to happen in a few years later. And one of the things that's discussed is in order to make sure that the Southern sisters stay in, is we stay segregated in this march. And Illinois had a real issue with that. And Ida B. Wells said, no, I am marching with my delegation, and she marched with her delegation. So to some degree, it was an integrated delegation. And that's very interesting over the course of women's suffrage too. You know, we started in that clip tonight, and we see the movement for African-American men to have the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. And then there's all this dissension about how do women fit, and why on earth as women were we trying to divide ourselves by color and race instead of unity? So we have a very rich and evolving history. It's not an easy history, but I am very proud that in Illinois, we were that first state east of the Mississippi. I also think about in Moline, though, it took us almost 100 years later to have our first female mayor, who we have today. So when we think about local people, it still took a lot of time to evolve. Chris, I think you can better tell the story of Iowa than I can. I have some pieces, but I know you are very entrenched in that history.
Okay, Iowa's interesting because the Quad Cities didn't participate as much in the suffrage movement as one might have expected that they would have. The reason for that, the brewers in town. We had such a heavy German population, and as Lisa talked about earlier, the temperance and suffrage movements went hand in hand. And so a lot of the Germans were against suffrage because that would mean temperance. But elsewhere in the state, we had a couple of women who turned out to be national figures in the suffrage movement. Amelia Bloomer was from Council Bluffs, or she moved to Council Bluffs in 1854, and she served as one of the presidents of the Iowa Suffrage Association in the 1870s. And we also had Carrie Chapman Catt, who was from Mason City. She was a superintendent of schools there, and she was also a president of the Iowa Suffrage Association. And through her association with that, she was elected to president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. So she served on a national level as well. Iowa in 1894 established limited suffrage for women. They could vote on bond or tax issues. That's all. They couldn't elect any candidates, couldn't do any voting on candidates, but they could at least vote on bond issues. And the reason for that is because a lot of times those bond issues were library issues, asking for money to establish or to assist libraries. And the women, of course, felt very strongly about the library movement and were very involved in it. In the Quad Cities, we did have some suffrage women, but we also had some anti-suffrage women as well too. Some of those people who were very strongly suffrage was, well, interestingly enough, Susan Glaspell, an author. Not surprising considering her plays and short stories that she wrote, that she would be pro-suffrage. But her fellow writer, Alice French, who was Octave Thanet, that was her nom de plume, she was anti-suffrage, which is very interesting because she was a single lady, and you would think that as a single lady, she would want her vote to count and to mean something. But for all women, after the Civil War, with the massive loss of life of the men, there were more single women in the United States at that time than probably in any other time. And they were disenfranchised because it was assumed that your husband, your father, your brother, your son would be your vote if you were a woman. But there were a lot of spinsters. They couldn't marry because there weren't enough men to marry all the women. So I think that's part of what drove this movement after the Civil War is the women were disenfranchised and they wanted the vote.
You guys are just a wealth of knowledge. I could sit here and listen to you guys talk about it all day. Rachel, could you tell us just some more details that folks would need to know about the Liberated Voices Change Lives exhibit, like dates that it'll be running, hours for the Putnam, any COVID-related things that you have to deal with now? Love to hear all the information.
Sure. So the exhibit was open for about a week before we were forced to close our doors. So we really wanted an opportunity for our community to see this extraordinary exhibit. So it has been extended through November 4th will be the new closing date. So it will be open through Election Day, which we thought was a wonderful tie. We have also amended our hours. So we are now open 5 days a week, Wednesdays through Sundays, from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And you can see the exhibit at any time during that time. We do encourage visitors to check out our website because, like many institutions, our guidelines, hours, resources, and requirements are changing based on what's happening here locally with the virus. Right now, we are requiring an advance ticket, either purchase or reservation through the website or by calling us at the museum so that we can establish a set arrival time in order to assure our visitors that there's proper social distancing at their arrival. We also ask visitors to observe gallery capacity limits. So at any given time, if the gallery is full, we'll ask you to join another one of our exhibits and come back around to see the Liberated Voices Change Lives exhibits. You'll also notice sanitizing stations throughout and a lack of interactives. We have removed the majority of the interactives that we're kind of known for. So the Science Center is closed, the gift shop is closed, concessions, until we feel comfortable reopening those to the public. So we're asking folks to kind of keep an eye on the website and we can let you know about the changes at the museum. one thing that you'll notice is that we have separated the daily visitor entrance into the Natural Sciences Annex, so that now our visitors have a more accessible entrance directly off the parking lot, but also can be assured of a separate entrance from groups and our school children and camp attendees coming. So it's a little more personal approach at the Putnam now, and you can check out our website for all those details. We are allowing small groups in the museum up to 25, and this exhibit in particular does provide a wonderful opportunity for women's groups, young women's groups to come and really explore and have a dialogue about the exhibit, but also about how some of its themes really carry through to today. And that's kind of our mission, to preserve, educate, and connect our community, and this exhibit offers a wonderful opportunity to do just that around this historic milestone.
That's great that it can stay open a little bit longer right through
That's
election
right.
day. For everybody else who's on this this screening, if you look right above my head, there's a Putnam Museum logo. You can click on that. It will take you directly to the Liberated Voices Change Lives exhibit webpage. So you can learn a little bit more there and learn more about the Putnam there as well. I think it's time for some audience questions, and we've got a few that have come in already. The first one is from an anonymous folk. It says, could you please describe a few of the important artifacts in the exhibit? I would assume, Christina, that would be for you.
Okay. I think one of my favorite parts of it is our two cases that we have in there. One case is the contents of the purse of a woman before suffrage and the contents of the purse after suffrage, because there's such a huge change. After suffrage, we're in the roaring 20s. The women are carrying driver's license, cigarettes, bottles of illegal hooch, all that type of stuff, and money, because before suffrage, if a woman was going anyplace, her escort, her husband, her date would pay for everything, so she didn't need any money. But after suffrage, women were going places by themselves.
One of my favorites is the clothing. When you think about how slowly fashions change over your lifetime even, and how modest a change you might see in a collar or colors or whatever, there's a wonderful casement that shows the difference in ladies' outerwear and undergarments pre-suffrage and after, and that the skirt line went up by about 18 inches over the course of less than a decade. So just a really, really interesting before and after glimpse into the lives of women.
I think too, Rachel and Christina, Rachel, you mentioned Royal Neighbors, and I think that their banners and the words on those banners, which pertain so much to their business, but they really pertain to women in the whole movement, really add an additional visual element to that exhibit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have some wonderful artifacts from Royal Neighbors, a gavel that they used to gavel in some of their national meetings. And they actually created a play called Suffragette Social, and it was distributed across the nation to the chapters, and is thought to be a major influence on the passage of suffrage. So just some wonderful artifacts that speak to the impact of our local people in the movement.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see it myself. Maggie says that Iowa was the fourth state in the nation to pass the women's right to vote. And someone else asked, when did Iowa pass the ERA? Yep.
We love our Maggie.
Someone asked, though, when did Iowa pass the ERA and how much of a struggle was it?
Oh.
You know what? I can't answer that one.
That's what librarians do. Hold on.
The librarian is on it.
ERA amendment and ratification.
Put Maggie on. Put Maggie. Maggie, you tell it.
Well,
she probably knows.
While she's looking that up, I will point out that
ratification by state.
We do have. Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa. Go on.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was just saying that in the exhibit we do have. When we can do interactives again, we do have a polling place where we allow guests to vote for the Equal Rights Amendment because there's still controversy now. And some of the states who did vote in favor of it have are starting to say now, no, we want to take our vote back. So it's an interesting question.
Iowa ratified it March 24th, 1972.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. My job. We got to support Maggie. She's been so good to our community in so many capacities.
He has been.
She just really models leadership.
Really.
Absolutely. Someone else asked, was Phoebe Sudlow active in the suffrage movement? And they said she was the first female superintendent in the U.S. and Iowa, I believe. So
she was the first superintendent, female superintendent, I think, in the nation, actually, and was a University of Iowa professor. I think one of the first female college professors as well. She was a little early for the suffrage movement. I don't know her specific role, but I think she was superintendent in the Davenport schools in the 1870s. So that would have put her a little ahead of the suffrage movement. But I don't know. She may have had a local suffrage commitment and connection. Chris, do you know, did that name come up?
I believe that she was in favor, but the part of suffrage that we really examined was that final push to get suffrage passed. So we started looking at suffrage from 1900 on. And so she predates the time period that we were looking at.
But I think you made a good point too, Rachel, about her being educated and wanting to educate other people. And I know in a different part of the vote, it really stresses that too. Here's all these women, we're going to college, we're going to university, we have these professional degrees, and we're out in the world and, oh, we can't participate, we can't play, we can't use our minds in the way we've just been taught these last 4+ years. Well, golly, what are you going to do? Of course, you're going to advocate for yourself to have a greater role in society and be able to have your voice heard.
And you're not getting paid equally, which was one of
we still aren't getting paid equally.
So she really took on the issue of equal pay in school systems and how much less female teachers were being paid than men. And that was one of her big causes that kind of moved her up through the ranks and took her into a leadership role so quickly in the education world. And thank you for the question. I bet there's a Davenport Schools ringer out there.
There must be.
I bet I know who it is.
Isn't that the fun of the Quad Cities? It's so big, but it's so small.
Right.
That's for sure. Another question came in, did churches actively work against suffrage? I know, Lisa, you talked a little bit about church, some of these ladies coming in and actually speaking at churches. Did any work against suffrage?
In terms of some of the way the polity of a church might be, that perhaps, but I really didn't go further into it than the things at First Congregational. And Congregationalists were always often at the forefront of a lot of different social issues, not just suffrage and not just some of the other social issues. Chris, do you know?
I believe that some of the more conservative churches, the pastors spoke out against suffrage because that was not a woman's place. A woman's place was at home taking care of the children. But, you know, because the pastor spoke out about it doesn't mean that that's what all of the congregants believed. So.
Thanks for clarifying all that. Appreciate that. It looks like we've got just about all the questions that have been asked. If anybody else has a question, feel free to type it in right now. Somebody asked, when does the documentary air on WQPT? It actually aired the last couple weeks, and you can find it now on the PBS video app, which is free on your Roku or smart TV or Apple TV or Amazon Fire Stick, any of those things. You can get it free on there, and you can also go to the website. I put the link in the chat box, so you can click right on it, and you can watch all 4 hours tonight if you wanted to stay up late. Does anybody else have any questions for our panelists?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Is that Mr. Rogers' living room?
Yes, it is.
I thought so. Room raiders would approve.
No, it's my living room. That's what it looks like. No. Actually, if you want to get these Zoom template backgrounds, they are available on the, I believe it's a PBS Parents website. They put a bunch of them on there so parents can go to their Zoom meetings and pretend that they're sitting in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood and other PBS Kids shows. You can be in Arthur's living room as well. So, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions from our audience. I want to just thank Lisa and Rachel and Christina for being a part of this. If you're still participating, still paying attention, please make sure you go to the Putnam website and check it out. And also make sure you go to the WQPT website and learn more with us. So thank you to everyone.
Can I add one more
Sure.
thing in closing? And I hope my colleagues would agree with this. I know there's some data that show only about 50 to 55% of the women in this community voted in the last election. So on this 100th anniversary, let's use this hard-earned right and vote. However you choose to vote, that's between you and your ballot box. But our four sisters earned this for us. Let us use it.
Well said.
Absolutely.
Well said. And I guess we'll end on that. That was perfect. So thank you everybody for joining us this evening. We appreciate you taking the time, and keep watching the WQPT website and Facebook page. We'll have more events like this in the future. Thank you so much.
Fabulous, Michael.
Thank
See you at
you.
the Putnam.
Library. Online.